how do we talk about the human experience? The parts of life that are so beautiful and yet fragile. The moments that make us stand in awe and the moments that make us hang our heads. And we can certainly share the facts of our lives, but as my English professor used to say, that which is most personal is often that which is most universal. And so as humans, we spend kind of our lives unpacking what existence means. That's the gift of poetry and of novel and of a good story. And so we keep doing that again and again and again, as we have for millennia. So if you want to talk about the universal experience of finding life absolutely beautiful, you might set it in a garden, a beautiful garden, where everything is right and good and whole, in which everything lives together in perfect harmony. All of these creatures that God has made, that God has called good, that live in this place together. Dew on your feet, sun on your face. Listening to the birds of paradise singing and doing their dances for one another. And all of the creatures live together, and the humans have a life-giving work, tending the soil and caring for everything as God has cared for them. And the place is so perfect, God walks there in the evening at twilight, and it is perfect peace. But is that the whole story? Because you see, in human experience, it's really possible to sit at Presque Isle and see the most beautiful sunset you've ever seen, or watch your kids or your grandkids learn how to play by themselves and create stories for the first time, and it melts your heart. And you can do both of those things while inside your heart breaks because your dear friend has a bad diagnosis. And so the beautiful garden is there, but it holds a deeper secret, that it was created out of the primordial chaos. The Spirit hovered over the uncontrolled, dark, and shadowy waters. And God pooled the waters together and made land, and the garden grows. But the chaos isn't erased. The waters, they're still there. The threat lurks. But the story of the garden and the humans that are in it is a story of not knowing that exists, of that innocence we all have for a time before life happens, or before a certain event finds us, or happens to us. A kind of unbroken joy, but there's another piece to it. And if we're honest, more than a seed of trouble lurks in the actual garden. In this story, it's an entire tree. And God says, you know, the garden is great and everything in it is beautiful. Eat whatever you want, but not that tree. Do not, under any circumstances, eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because if you do, I promise you'll die. And any time you set a rule for somebody, yeah, you know, there's that universal human experience, immediately think, okay, and why? Why couldn't I eat that beautiful fruit? And for a time, the humans just kind of, everything is perfect, and they bury that anxiety or that worry or that question deep within them. And they just live life because it's beautiful. Until the day the serpent shows up, crafty little bugger. But he's not Satan, and he's not a devil. He's just a dirt creature with a hermeneutic of suspicion, with a rebellious streak, with a couple of good questions. And so he shows up to our human couple who are having a delightful day petting some lions or something, and he says, you know, about that tree, about that fruit, do you really, really think you're gonna die if you eat it? And they're both there, and the woman engages in him and says, yeah, God said so. And the serpent says, yeah, about that. Do you think that's true? It's an interesting question. And it raises this sort of question that sometimes comes to us from the outside. A life event or a serpent or another person kind of brings this question that we don't really want to have to answer. We don't really want to have to bother about it, but now it's in front of us. It raises a skepticism. And the serpent's asking a reasonable question, but it's not just about the fruit. It's kind of about reality. What is this reality God has set up? Why can't you eat the fruit? Is God really good? Or is God holding out on you? And if the humans were honest with themselves, the skeptical questions of the serpent are met by their own skeptical questions. See, it's one thing to have the kind of question in your brain, but it's another to have someone outside of you validate it. The serpent has validated it. And so now Eve thinks, or the woman thinks, why can't we eat that fruit? Like, what is God holding out on us? And see right there, there's an implicit assumption in that question. Why is God holding out on us? Well, is God in the first place? But now they're kind of dancing towards the tree, just kind of led there, you know. The closer they get, the more it smells delightful. And now it feels like God is saying, no, you can't have that perfect Georgia peach that's sitting in the sun on the picnic table in June. No, you can't have those cherries worth getting, those melons, icy, piled high on the golden dish. They're not for you. And so Eve reaches up. It's kind of velvety feeling. It pops in her hand immediately. It's so ripe. And with it comes a second one, let's say. One for her, one to share. Buy one, get one. And they're kind of like, ah. And the servant's there like, uh-huh. And they take a bite. Tentatively. And then absolutely voraciously. And they fling the rinds away. And it tastes sweeter than honey from the rock. Until something begins to curdle. And Eve, and the woman and the man look at each other, and something has changed. See? And suddenly she feels this rush of prickling heat throughout her. She wants to hide. It's a new feeling, and later they'll name it shame. And he looks at her, and there's like some juice, and he hates her for a minute. And then he hates the serpent. And then he touches his own mouth, and his fingers are sticky, and he hates himself for a moment. And later, they'll decide and call that blame. And there's a moment where nothing is ever going to be the same again. They feel naked, and they feel lost, and there is a regret. But there's also an intoxication that comes from eating the fruit. To pluck it, to buy the forbidden fruit, to suck it dry, and to know that you might do it again because it was so delicious, even though you regret it. And it's a moment. No, they don't literally die, but something is dead. They can't go back. You can't undo the action. You can't unsee the thing. You can't unknow the knowledge. You've opened the box. The mirror's cracked side to side. Paradise is lost. And they go and they try to wash off their hands. They try to wash, but the scent is like on them. They can't get rid of it. They keep smelling it. They think it gives them away, but it also keeps leading them back. And they gnash their teeth for want of it. But then it's evening. And God walks in the garden in the evenings. And so they hide. And the silence of the birds, and the changed direction of the wind, and God knows something is wrong. And from a place of deep knowing and a place of deep concern, God says, "Where are you?" And the man and the woman answer, "Well, We're over here behind this mulberry bush because we're naked. And that's the truth, isn't it? Now they know good and evil, but it has no wisdom in it. You eat from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, and you know what's good and you know what's evil, but if you don't eat from the tree of life, you're missing out. And just because you know good from evil doesn't mean you have wisdom. And so God cries out in frustration and lamentation, "What have you done? What have you done?" And Eve puts her finger over in the bush and says, "It wasn't me, it was the serpent." And thus it begins, the obfuscation, the shaming and the blaming. And the distance already has grown between the human couple, the other dirt creatures, and God. And if you read on, God offers then a kind of list of curses. And it's a little bit ambiguous. Is God cursing God's beloved good creation? Or is God naming the inevitable consequences that act as curses when people choose the wrong, when people overreach, when people listen to the wrong voices and go with unkindness? Because all of the curses and consequences are relational. Enmity enters the world. Gone is the peace and the ease of the garden. Gone is the innocence of the garden. And gone is the garden. Because God knows that the intoxicating nature of that tree and its fruit, the people will be back for it again and again. And with each time comes more knowledge and less wisdom and less life. And so God locks the garden away. Gone are both trees. And the couple is cast out, and they weep as if their hearts would break. And the minute they set foot in the wilder world, a land that has more chaos in it, a land that's not so perfectly peaceful, the trouble begins. Because though I've slipped up a few times, that's when the man decides he should name that woman who's his wife. And thus a pattern of oppression begins. It seems unending. A rift, a break. It starts from the moment they leave. And they go out, but they don't go alone. Because in a moment oft overlooked, but perhaps the greatest grace ever named, is that God sews for them garments. God takes them and makes an absolute tangible kind of present of clothing to these now frightened, alone, regretting humans. They've messed it all up. They've ruined the garden, but God loves them anyway. They're God's good creation. And God will not leave them alone. God will not comfort them. And so they go out into the wide world, clothed by God, but they go in a different way. God can't walk in a world like this one. The profane is too close to the sacred. And God won't walk again among people until a man named Jesus pops up in a town named Nazareth. And so the people go out. And for generations and generations and generations, they experience the beauty and the breakage. And they try to make sense of it, and they tell one another about it. And so we begin today, Lent, with this true story. I don't read it myself like a factual history, but it is a true story about how humans are, about how we are, a story of lost innocence, of longing for both that innocence and for forbidden fruit, of choosing against our own goodness, refusing to believe in our belovedness, and knowing that harms us, doing it anyway. A story of suspicion of God and of others and of this good earth. A story of our inherent goodness juxtaposed with our chosen willfulness. And Lent invites us to own it all. To stop the shaming and the blaming, and instead to contemplate what serpents we listen to, and what suspicions we harbor, and what forbidden fruit we choose to devour. And knowing all the while that we're created good, that we are beloved of God. And no matter what we listen to or what fruit we eat, God never abandons us. God always, always clothes us with goodness and grace and mercy.